All right, well, turning to Venezuela, interim President Juan Guaido is back in his home country. Guaido wrapped up a tour around Latin America to seek support as he calls for new elections against sitting President Nicolas Maduro, who banned Guaido from leaving the country. Before Guaido's attempt to re-enter Venezuela this morning, Vice President Mike Pence threatened retaliation if Guaido's return to Venezuela was met with violence, saying his safe return was, quote, of the highest importance for the U.S. Guaido entered the country about an hour ago without incident, avoiding further escalation for now. But for more developments there, we're joined by Heritage Foundation's Senior Policy Analyst for Latin America, Ana Quintana. Ana, thanks so much for joining us via Skype.
Hi.
I want to ask you first, I guess, if the way that Vice President Mike Pence was setting this up, if Maduro not touching Guaido is a sign of cooling tensions in the country.
We should not interpret that whatsoever. I mean, and it's not just the United States that has issued a warning to the Maduro regime to keep Guaido safe. It's the over 50 countries that recognize Guaido that have stated that he needs to be protected and he needs to be kept safe. And it's not just him, but it's his wife and it's his young daughter. A few weeks ago, the Maduro regime's thugs invaded Guaido's home unprompted, and his wife was alone with their 3-year-old daughter. And I mean, it was quite a scary scene because they could have easily been taken away and, taken to a military prison, and nobody could have heard from them again.
Well, in terms of, I guess, stepping up support to make sure that something like that doesn't happen, obviously the U.S. stepping up its role. Over the weekend, we saw National Security Advisor John Bolton say that the Monroe Doctrine is not something that he's afraid to reference, which, of course, puts the U.S. in more of an interventionist spot to step in Venezuela. Do you think that that is inevitable when we talk about the U.S. involvement there?
I mean, in terms of interventionism, I think the question and the conversation we should be having is looking at the Cuban government's interventionism in Venezuela, looking at the Russians' interventionism and China's interventionism, because, 20 years of that has taken Venezuela to the point of bankruptcy. I mean, it's taken the country to the humanitarian crisis that it's in right now. And that's why we're seeing an interim president, a legally appointed interim president. We're seeing Venezuela in the transition point that it's in right now. I mean, at no point in Venezuela's history have you ever seen over 50 countries recognize an interim president. I mean, no point have you ever seen the international coalition that's been assembled against Maduro. And I think so, when we want to talk about interventionism, I mean, this is not a U.S.-led initiative at all. There's over 50 countries. It's the majority of the Western Hemisphere. This is something, and I can promise you, as somebody who's been watching Latin America and as somebody who's been watching Venezuela, this is unprecedented.
Unprecedented in what regards? Just the fact that the U.S. is not the only one operating here to support Guaido, or the fact that people backing Maduro have now dwindled?
Well, the fact that it's the majority of the Western Hemisphere, right? The majority of the Western Hemisphere are now standing against a dictator. I mean, the Castro regime has been in power for over 60 years, and they've never done this. But with Venezuela, the Chavistas, right? The Maduro regime has been in power for, barely been 20 years. And look at this international coalition that's been assembled. You have countries openly saying that Maduro must step down, that his human rights violations, that his stolen elections, that his electoral fraud, that his drug trafficking, I mean, that his whole litany of crimes are just completely unacceptable. I mean, this is pretty big. And I think, U.S. media focuses on what the United States and what the U.S. says, because obviously it's in English. But I think if we're looking at the statements coming out of Latin America, we'd be pretty surprised to see how strong they are.
All right. So real quick, before we let you go, considering all that, do you think that Maduro will agree to having another round of elections in Venezuela?
Maduro's never going to agree to elections. Maduro needs to step down, full point stop. I mean, he's not going to agree to elections because he knows that the country is against him. He knows that he's lost it. Maduro has only won the previous elections because of electoral fraud, because he controls the levers of power within the country. But he knows that in a free and fair situation with international observers that he will lose.
All right. Thanks so much. Ana Quintana joining us from D.C. Thank you. Appreciate it.